Because instead of just saying, oh, well, the knobs were tuned to the right values anyway, you say, oh, there was a God who knew how to tune the knobs to the right values.
Who created God?
What created God?
Oh, no.
If God did indeed have a beginning, by the simple logic of cause and effect, there had to be an agent, separate and apart from the effect, that caused it.
So then I want to know where God came from.
It's the old schoolboy question, who created God? I'm actually very surprised to find it as a central argument. It's exactly what Dawkins says in The God Delusion. Well, let's analyze it for a moment.
Have you ever tried to explain that if there was a beginning to the universe, if there was a beginning to the earth and the world, there has to be a creator, because nothing can create nothing? And then someone might be like, well, then who created God? That's what a lot of people like to say. And today we're going to be tackling this very question. And for me, I think it's super helpful to watch these videos because it helps everyone understand. That question, who created God, is pretty simple and easily answered when you get down to the nitty-gritty. So we're going to be watching to a video of Richard Dawkins and then John Lennox, and then also a video from Inspiring Philosophy answer why that question is not very reliable and easily debunked. Let's get into it.
The idea of the physical constants being finely tuned. And it's quite true that many scientists, many physicists maintain that the physical constants, the half dozen or so numbers that physicists have to simply assume in order to derive the rest of their understanding, just have to be assumed. You can't provide a rationale for why those numbers are there. And physicists have calculated that if any of these numbers was a little bit different, the universe as we know it wouldn't exist. We wouldn't be here. The universe would perhaps have fizzled out in the first yoctosecond, and so we wouldn't be here, or other things would have gone wrong. It's tempting, once again, to import the easy, facile idea of a designer and to say that the designer twiddled the knobs of the universe at the Big Bang and got them exactly right, got the gravitational constant right, got the strong force right, the weak force right, and so on. But it seems to me to be manifestly obvious that that is a futile kind of explanation because, as the quotation says, who designed the designer? You have explained precisely nothing, because instead of just saying, oh, well, the knobs were tuned to the right values anyway, you say, oh, there was a God who knew how to tune the knobs to the right values. And if you're going to postulate that, then you've, in a sense, sold the pass.
I want to address the who designed the designer question, because it's the old schoolboy question, who created God? I'm actually very surprised to find it as a central argument in your book, because it assumes that God is created. And I'm not surprised, therefore, that you call the book The God Delusion, because created gods are by definition a delusion. Now, I know, and I ought to explain, that Richard doesn't like people who say to him that they don't believe in the God he doesn't believe in. But I think that this is possibly touching a sore spot, because you leave yourself wide open to the charge. After all, you are arguing that God is a delusion. And in order to weigh your argument, I said that it is you who's arguing that God is a delusion.
Oh, sorry. All right, thank you.
And in order to weigh that argument, I need to know what you mean by God. And if you say, if there is a God, you have to ask who created God, that means that you're reduced to thinking about created gods. Well, none of us believe in created gods, Jews, Muslims, or Christians. And I think that argument then is entirely beside the point, and perhaps you ought to put it on your shelf marked celestial teapots where it belongs. The God who created the universe, ladies and gentlemen, was not created. He is eternal. This is the fundamental distinction between God and the universe. It came to exist, he did not. And this is precisely the point the Christian apostle John makes at the beginning of his gospel. In the beginning was the Word. The Word already was. All things came to be by him. God is uncreated. The universe was created by him. Now, I don't know whether Richard has difficulty with the concept of the uncreated. I don't know, and I'd love to know whether he believes as a materialist that matter and energy and the laws of nature were always there, because if they were, he does believe in something eternal. So perhaps the difficulty lies in believing in an eternal person.
So this is super, super interesting, because he's like, you believe in the laws of nature, and the laws of nature are eternal. So you do believe that something is eternal. But obviously we know that the Big Bang, the universe had a beginning. We know that. We see that. So therefore, there had to be a reason for that to have a beginning, a cause, a designer, a creator. But there's no reason for a God to be created. And you'll see here after we watch a John Lennox video, and then we have an inspiring philosophy video explained.
One of the most basic difficulties for those who hold the view of the materialistic universe is the question of a beginning. And as you pointed out before, Christianity has long claimed that the universe was created, and now we have the Big Bang theory that suggests at least that it started at a certain time. And yet, then there's always the issue, yes, but if there can't be an uncaused cause, then what created God? And I guess Christianity perhaps gives different answers to that. As I understand it, Augustine's answer was that God is outside time. And in a way, that's a good answer, but it seems to me that that's a way of saying, we don't know what the explanation is, because none of us has the slightest idea of what it means to be outside time. Or Christianity says that the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit are three, but they are one. And from those statements, many wonderful things follow. And yet, it seems to be a way of saying, we don't know what it is, because we have no idea of what it means to be three and to be one, and how a God as powerful and as amazing, let's say, as the God of Job could appear in the form as a human being and be the Holy Spirit. So my point is this, and as I say, I think this may be a strength or a weakness, but it does seem as if many of the difficult questions are just explained by mysteries, which is a Christian word, that in a way are saying, we don't know. So I don't know that that's whether that's a challenge or a suggestion or a help, but
it's a wonderful challenge.
But I'd be interested in your response to it.
Yes, I love this particular thing, and I've had to think about it a great deal, because of course it's absolutely obvious that replacing one mystery by another is not always a helpful way forward.
Sometimes it might be.
Yeah, well, well, if it's a more sensible mystery. Let's unpack this, because there are 3 or 4 questions, which is why I wrote them down, because with my dying brains, I can't remember everything. But let's come to that first question, which has interested me because it's become a great focus recently, both in North America and Britain and in Europe. Everybody's talking about it. I thought I'd left it behind in Russia. And that's the question, who created God? And Dawkins has made it the heart of his book, The God Delusion. I was staggered when I found it there. What I mean about Russia, ladies and gentlemen, is I used to get this all the time in the Academy of Sciences when I was traveling out to Russia in the late 1980s and the early 1990s, you see. That it was almost the first question. If you believe that God created the universe, then logically you've got to ask the question, who created God? And then you have to ask, who created the God that created the God that created the God that created the God that created
Literally,
God? And so on ad infinitum. And that was the end of God, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I struggled with this too. It was a very difficult thing when people would say, then who created God? And obviously then I would just be like, well, God didn't get created. But I didn't know like how to explain why he didn't get created. But as you can see, there is a reason. And it's an on and on thing. But you can see here that not everything has to be created. There's a difference. But through science, we know that the universe had a beginning. Every beginning needs a creator, something to set it into motion. But not everything is created.
That's exactly what Dawkins says in The God Delusion. Well, let's analyze it for a moment. Who created God? If you ask that question, it shows you've immediately categorized God as created. So you're talking about a created God. Now you imagine if Richard Dawkins had written a book called The Created God's Delusion. I don't think many people would have bought it, because I don't need him to tell me that created gods are a delusion. We usually call them idols, incidentally.
Yep.
But you see, this question, this question is extremely interesting because it's an illustration of a question that already rules out the explanation that's most likely to be true. Because the Christian claim is that God wasn't created.
Yep.
So if God was uncreated, in the beginning was the Word, and I'm coming to your 3-in-1 now, and I'm bringing it in obliquely. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He already was. So the central Christian claim is, and in Judaism and Islam, of course, equally, is that God is eternal. So the question, by definition, doesn't even apply to him. And that's immensely important. The only way you can get anything out of it then, in the negative sense, is to assume that everything is in the category of the created, but that's just begging the original question. And the Greeks were interested in it, and that's why John's Gospel starts with those words. In the beginning, the Word already was, and then it says, all things came to be through him.
Yeah.
The Greeks were interested in the question of two categories: the things that came to be, the created things, and the things that already were. And the question resolves down to this: is there a thing or a being that never came to be? And that is the Christian claim, and he's called God. But there's a little codicil to this, you see. Richard Dawkins, and I had a debate with him on this very topic in Oxford, and I said to him, Richard, you say that who created God is a legitimate question. I don't think it is, but let me assume now that it is. You believe that the universe created you. So I beg leave now to ask you, using your own question, who created your creator? I'm waiting still for the answer.
Wow.
So that's the first point. Very briefly to the second.
That's such a great comeback. You believe in a creator. Well, the universe created you. Then who created your creator? Sheesh. John Lennox is low-key like a gangster, not gonna lie.
God is 3 in 1. Is it a mystery? Yes, it is. And am I allowed to tell a little story?
Yeah, although I think
brief
we
one.
should,
Yeah,
want to get to
moving on.
Yeah.
Okay.
But do tell the story. 'Cause I'd
Yeah.
like to hear it.
I was talking to about 1,000 scientists, and a man came up to me afterwards, a physicist, and he said, that was very interesting, all that talk about God, but he said, do you know, I detect you're a Christian. And I said, you're...
Very astute gentleman.
Yeah. Well, that's what I said. I said, you're pretty sharp. And he said, John, he said, come off it, he said. Now look, as a Christian, you're obliged to believe that God is a triunity, that Jesus was God and man. And he said, no, come on, you're a mathematician at Oxford. This is absurd. Can you explain it to me? Well, I said, can I ask you a question first? He said, sure. So I said, tell me, what is consciousness? And he thought for a second, and then he said, I don't know. I said, that's okay, let me try an easier one. What is energy? Well, he said, I'm a physicist, I can measure energy, I could use it. I said, you know, that's not my question, what is it? He said, I don't know. Oh, I said, that's very interesting. You don't know. Tell me, I said, do you believe in consciousness? Yes, he said. Do you believe in energy? Yes, he said. So I said, you believe in these two things, you don't know what they are.
Wow.
I said, should I write you off as an intellectual? And he said, please don't. And I said, but that's exactly what you were going to do with me 5 minutes ago. Now,
Sheesh. Man, he's out here dropping bombs, diss tracks, all of the above. Wow. He's like, do you believe in consciousness? He's like, yes, but do we know what consciousness is? Not really. Can we explain it? Not really. But we know it's there. Wow. That would be funny. I think if John Lennox writes a diss track against all, like, a Richard Dawkins diss track, that would be fire. I would listen to it.
And if you don't know what energy is, and nobody does, and if you don't believe that, you physicists, read Richard Feynman. If you don't know what energy is, don't be surprised if energy, light, gravity, and consciousness are a mystery. Don't be surprised if you're going to get an element of this in God.
Yep.
You're bound to get it. But now I pushed him a bit further, you see. And I said, why do you believe in these things if you don't know what they are? And that was a bit difficult. So being a kind chap, I tried to help him out. And I said, you believe in these things because of their explanatory power as concepts. And he said, that's exactly right. Now I said, look, of course I can't explain to you how God became human. But I said, it's the only explanation that makes sense of the evidence as I see it. Now I said, I've got a simple analogy that might help you. It's a very low-level analogy, but at least it's biblical. I'm married. I've been married for 42 and a half years.
Wow.
To the same person. And, and my wife and I are, in a sense, one. We're two persons in one flesh, the Bible would say, but in one unit. And it seems to me that at the very least, don't misunderstand me when I say this, that this mystery is telling us something magnificent about God. God is not a monolith who, to put it crudely, was lonely, so he made a few people so that he could have somebody to talk to. God is himself a fellowship. Now that's undimensioned and we can't grasp it, but there is a sense in which I feel it's got to be something like that.
I love the fact that he brought up God didn't create humans because he was like lonely. He created humans in his image, and how a man and woman come together in relationship. That's like a symbolic way kind of to show that the Trinity they're in perfect relationship with each other and community with each other. And I always butcher the Trinity, not gonna lie. Like, trying to explain it, learning that I'm a heretic when it comes to explaining the Trinity, watching Wes Huff's videos. But it's funny. Now I have one more video that is by Inspiring Philosophy. It's pretty quick, and it says that the worst objection to theism is the question, who created God? So let's get into it.
There is an argument used against the existence of God that is by far the worst objection I've ever heard. You won't find it used among professional philosophers, but instead, I tend to encounter it in great amounts online among laymen. When theists argue from cosmological or contingency arguments that God created the universe, the skeptic can make is,
Who created God? What created God?
Oh no.
If God did indeed have a beginning, by the simple logic of cause and effect, there had to be an agent separate and apart from the effect that caused it.
So then I want to know where God came from.
Who created God? Who created the person who created God? Who created the person who created the person who created God?
Design is dead, otherwise one must explain who designed the designer.
Who created this God?
This, in my opinion, is by far the worst objection ever made by a skeptic. And I don't even need to appeal to theistic philosophers to point this out. I can refer to atheist philosophers like Michael Roos, who highly agrees. Now, for those who may be wondering why this is such a bad objection, the basic reasoning is there is no thought put into it. Just because we can argue the universe was created, that doesn't mean we imply that everything needs a creator to exist. How the skeptic can make this leap is beyond me. No theist argues everything needs a creator. Look at the very simple Kalam cosmological argument. The first premise is not everything has a cause, but that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Obviously, we're not implying everything has a creator, but only things that have a beginning. My favorite cosmological argument...
Only things that have a beginning have a creator. We know that the universe has a beginning. Everyone agrees with it. Then you have to say, then who created that beginning? Who caused that beginning? But for God, obviously doesn't have a beginning. Then you can't say, then who created God then? That is so good.
The Leibnizian version makes this distinction very clear. Anything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external explanation. So again, just because some things like the universe have an external cause, that doesn't mean everything that exists must also have a cause. God would be by definition of the first category, a being who doesn't need an external cause and is necessary. Because of this, asking who created God is equivalent to asking what caused an uncaused thing. It simply is nonsensical. Basically, cosmological arguments have pointed out for centuries that since contingent things exist, like us, our existence can only be explained by appealing to external causes. However, this cannot go on infinitely. There has to be a first cause, an unmoved mover, which started this chain. Whatever this is, it would be necessary, not needing to be created, which is who we theists would then call God. So when theists argue the universe has a cause or an explanation, we are saying this infers a substance or a being that would be the first cause and is uncreated and necessary, which we theists then argue would be who we call God. This is not special pleading, since the first mover would be uncaused by definition and defined differently than contingent things like the universe. Look at it this way. The atheist philosopher David Hume said the universe was necessary. If you would have gone to David Hume and tried to refute his theory the universe was uncaused by asking if the universe is the explanation of our existence, then what created the universe, he would have simply replied he stated the universe is necessary, and therefore didn't need a creator. Now I bring this up because when I've tried to point this out to skeptics in the past, they commonly reply by saying, if God doesn't need a creator, then why does the universe? Why can't we just say the universe is necessary? Well, this was a prevalent belief of atheists before the 20th century, but the observable data in cosmology and physics has strongly refuted this possibility. An overwhelming amount of evidence now shows our space-time is contingent and had a beginning, so it cannot be necessary in and of itself. Now, of course, we can have a conversation over what is the most likely cause of the universe, and I've argued the theistic case in more detail elsewhere. But the basic point is simply asking who created God is a ridiculous objection, and I don't even need to appeal to theistic philosophers to point this out. I'll leave you with the words of the atheist philosopher Michael Roos, who responded to Richard Dawkins when he tried this objection.
Yeah, philosophy 100 undergraduate response, what caused God? You know, we've all done it. We've all been there. And, you know, I mean, it's a good question, but, you know, it's not the end of the argument. Dawkins then triumphantly says, there you are, bad argument, let's move on. You know, and I know, that Christians, St. Augustine, certainly St. Thomas, spent a hell of a lot of... I mean, they knew this. And so what they were trying to do was articulate a notion of God who would be first cause. You know, the whole notion of aseity, God as a necessary being, God a se, you know, God's essence is, you know, is his existence. The point is, Christians have got some grown-up responses to these sorts of things. And I think that Dawkins does a serious misservice to the cause of non-belief by not being prepared to take seriously the kinds of things that believers believe in.
Dang. And you can see right here, the Bible had it right all along. In the beginning was the Word. Already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. Wow. Absolutely amazing. I think this is just such an amazing reminder that we can trust the Bible and trust that God is who he said he was. And we don't have to be afraid that when people make wild claims and things that go against what the Bible teaches or go against what the Christian faith teaches, we can be sure and have a firm foundation that God is who he said he was. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So guys, I encourage you all to go to Jesus today. Know that he loves you. He's longing to have a relationship with you. God is good.